Ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, welcome back to another episode of Resurrection, Spiritual and Social Renewal. And I'm your host, Dawud, with you on this evening. And we have a very special guest on today's episode. But before introducing him, the current context that we are in right now, we are just less than 3 months from the brutal police extrajudicial murder of George Floyd in Minneapolis. Yesterday marked the 100-year anniversary of women's suffrage, actually white women's suffrage in the United States of America. Currently, we have the Democratic National Convention going on in this 2020 election year. And with all of these different events in the backdrop, we'd like to discuss some things that are currently going on, as well as referring back to the past, and in particular from an African American perspective. And with that, I'd like to call on this evening's host for this episode, good brother, a friend of mine, Brother Shakir Bakari Williams. Brother Shakir is an educator, a researcher, as well as an author of an upcoming book in which we will God willing, touch on some aspects of which he's been diligently and vigorously researching. He has a bachelor's degree in economics from Howard University, a master's degree in education from the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor, and he's taught not only here in the state of Michigan and in Maryland, but also taught in the United Arab Emirates for a number of years in the UAE, and he's also a world traveler. And he's seen not just life of folks and Black folks in the United States of America and in Canada, but he's traveled across the globe from varying countries in the so-called Middle East to also in Southeast Asia. And Brother Shakir actually just lost connection for a moment. And as he is about to come back, God willing, as he's about to return to this evening show, let me just say this in regards to what I said about yesterday being the 100th year anniversary of women's suffrage. And I said white women's suffrage because we know that it was not until the passing of the Voting Rights Act of 1965 in which there was complete women's suffrage in the United States of America, because we know that there was legalized barriers in southern states in particular for African Americans to vote in general, which also excluded African American women, Black women, from having the right to vote. So when we hear all these discussions about Susan B. Anthony and 100 years of women's suffrage, the historical reality about that is that that was white women's suffrage. And many of the narratives that we have in our society, these United States of America, when there are discussions in terms of this particular movement or that really much of that is posited or focused upon the experience of the dominant culture of white folks. Similarly, as we discussed with Dr. Bilal Ware on the first episode of this podcast, that in the wake of 4th of July or so-called Independence Day, July 4th, 1776, marking when a group of white men rebelled against another group of white men, that was not an Independence Day for the enslaved Africans who were treated like chattel here in the United States of America, nor was it Independence Day for the indigenous people, the First Nations people of this land, who were unjustly kicked off of their land, of their property, and were systematically subjugated from this land. With that, I believe our brother Shakir is now with us and trying to get his connection back for this evening show. And this is part of the problem of the COVID-19 restrictions, in which normally we'd be able to do such recordings in person, but due to social distancing and things of this nature, that we have to do this particular episode remotely. And we are waiting for Brother Shakir to come online. Let me also say this as we're waiting for Brother Shakir to come in, because I see there's something going on right now. And just very briefly, that we know that Senator Kamala Harris from California is running for the vice president, along with Joe Biden, to be president of these United States of America, in which she seeks to be in the Oval Office with Joe Biden, who is looking to be the 46th president of these United States of America. And within Black America, there's been a number of conversations that say, oh, well, Kamala Harris is not really Black. Why is she not really Black? Because her father wasn't African American, but he was an immigrant. He was an immigrant, from Jamaica. So he's really not Black. So she's really not Black enough, and then her mother is from India, an immigrant. And I just want to say something about this in clarification, that as Black folks, I don't think that we should play this type of game. One of the greatest leaders for Black folks here in the United States of America was an immigrant from Jamaica, the Honorable Marcus Garvey. He's from Jamaica. Not that I agree with all of his politics or his theology, for that matter, but Minister Louis Farrakhan of the Nation of Islam, both of his parents are from the Caribbean. Harry Belafonte is from the Caribbean. And we have so many other Black leaders who have done good for African Americans who came from the Caribbean. So let's not play that game about the sister. Some of our ancestors, the boat just went a little further south into British controlled areas of the Caribbean, and they didn't get dropped off in South Carolina and Virginia or Georgia. So with that, we have our brother here who's been able to join us, and God willing, the connection will be able to stay clear. Brother Shakir, assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.
Yes, it's good to have you on, brother. I see this little problem with your connection this evening, and we'll try to do the best that we can. And nonetheless, I wanted to have you on a second time anyway when you launch your book. But how's everything going for you this evening?
Doing well, brother. Doing well. I'm just a little frustrated that I'm not getting the best reception right now, so I'm frustrated about that. But otherwise, I'm well.
Okay, maybe what you might have to do, brother, and we can see, but perhaps if you are able to, I'm not sure if it's possible to do that, but if you're able to maybe turn your camera off and just have your audio, then maybe we'll have to do it that way. And perhaps that'll give you a little more bandwidth in regards to the interview. So we'll see if that helps or assists any. So, Brother Shakir, I was just talking about before we came on, and you and I talk a lot, but we're almost on the third month since the brutal, vicious murder of George Floyd at the hands of the Minneapolis Police Department. We know that Sister Breonna Taylor was murdered by the police down in Louisville, Kentucky, and actually, to my knowledge, no one has been indicted for that killing in which the police unjustly killed that unarmed sister. And I just wanted to get your take about not only these two, but the continuous extrajudicial murders that have been taking place against Black folks, and the protests that are still sporadically going on in a number of cities, ranging from Portland to Seattle to New Orleans to even here in Detroit?
Yes. Well, essentially, the murder, the extrajudicial killings of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and the countless others is reflective of one of the very foundational premises of white supremacy, and that is non-whites, especially those at the opposite end of the spectrum of whiteness, and in this instance being Africans and African descendants, are not really we're always the other. And so our repression, our subjugation, our misdirection, our maladjustment, and ultimately our murder is not seen as something abnormal under this system. And so the only difference now with the advent of technology and the ability for us to see these things, it makes it that much more readily accessible. But essentially, this is a continuation of what has happened not only in this country but everywhere that racist Europeans have gone. This is what they've done, and that is mete out the most brutal and vicious treatment against those they consider to be the other, and those that they consider to be perpetually inferior and subhuman.
Yeah, and I agree with you, and really the situation of cameras have only shed light on that which we've been saying for decades and decades and decades, and it seems like uh, not only people in the dominant culture, but even other so-called people of color didn't believe what we were saying, be it Asians, be it Arabs, until a lot of this footage started coming out and that began to show the sheer brutality and savagery of how these police officers will not only kill people or beat people, but will even take little kids who are minors and handcuff them in schools. So without this technology, and still a lot of people still say we're exaggerating or will still try to criminalize corpses. But in saying that, good brother, what do you think about protesting being a tool to try to bring about some sort of reform of police not coming through our neighborhoods, knocking us upside the head and shooting us? What do you think about protesting as a tool or a methodology?
I think protesting has its place. I think protesting is in some ways a natural response. It's a way to call attention to these atrocities. It's a way to vent understandable rage and anger. The protesting can ultimately take on the form of some type of economic reprisal if people are that unified to affect people and institutions financially and even politically. The problem I have, though, is where protesting becomes the only means, and protesting and demonstrations become the only way that people consider themselves on the road to self-determination or liberation. This is the problem that I have, where protesting takes on a life of its own, and it doesn't become a means, but it becomes the mean and the end. And so this is where protesting becomes problematic, such that people come to the when something happened, the other entities become to expect that at best we're going to engage in some type of protests, some type of nonviolent demonstrations, and some sloganeering. They have their place, but it's not sufficient. It's not enough.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And I also agree that there needs to be some legislative overhaul and some changing of certain policies. But the facts is that um, racism can't be protested out of people's hearts, and no amount of laws that are on the books can take not only animus out of people's hearts, but even the implicit biases that they have against certain people. So, what I would
Exactly.
say is that part of the thing that I've seen that's been missing in a lot of the discourse that's been going on is that number one, what are we going to do to better community police so that we can cut down on police presence in our own neighborhoods, number one. And then number two, also, what remedies are we going to do as far as trying to offer people in the American society a path towards redemption, a path towards changing people's hearts and minds? And just putting your fist up in the air and doing slogans about police or some of these woke suburbanites that try to come into our communities, our neighborhoods, or and try to encourage people to throw bricks through windows and other sorts of methods, the so-called speaking truth to power. All that does is make people uh, bunker down more in their silos, right? So,
Yes.
that's one of the things that it's been somewhat problematic in some of the things that I've seen recently. But I like your take on that last part that I said, good brother.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. Part of the problem is that people tend to look at the symptoms and not really the core issues. And so, uh, crime, uh, if you look at crime separate from social, psychological, and historical and even environmental factors, you're really not getting at the core. And so, crime in the Black community, this has to be placed in a historical context, and it has to be placed in a social psychological context. And so, the psychology of many African Americans under white supremacy is that white supremacy made African Americans. And a lot of the violence that we see, unity, uh, is reflective of this because it's so vicious, it's so brutal, uh, it's so inexplicable, it's so spontaneous, and the people who perpetuate it do it subconsciously. And so when you talk about policing and policing our own communities, this is part of the road to redemption because people in our community who perpetuate these crimes, they need to have their value systems changed. They need to be made to understand that their perpetuation of crime really is it's an extension of white supremacy. And so getting at the core and changing the value system of these people is part of it. The other thing, in regards to policing our community, this is another aspect of self-regulation and liberation, is that like-minded people have to come together and decide that, you know, it's not going to be tolerated, especially since The people who perpetuate crime in our community, they never dream of perpetuating this crime in anybody else's community. So if they were really crazy, if they were really unrepentant and uncontrollable, and they'll do crime anywhere, we would see them doing crime any and everywhere. We don't see that. We see them perpetuating crime where they're comfortable and where it's essentially tolerated.
Right. And you just made me think of something, and really going to the crux of what we're talking about, because part of the theme of this conversation, which we discussed before the show, was remedying our self-inflicted wounds. And I'd like to reference our mutual hero, Malcolm X, may God bless his soul. And Malcolm said, in this city, and I believe it was 1963. It was either 1963 or 1964, at least in one recorded speech. And he said it many times other places. He said famously, of all our studies, history is best qualified to reward our research. Of all of our studies, history is best qualified to reward our research. And, what's really interesting about history, and what's taken place in our communities, is that Malcolm and others, they simultaneously talked about outward oppression but inward wrongdoing, meaning that Malcolm had a critique about white supremacy. He had a critique about what the white man was doing with the police force and the criminal injustice system and the economic injustice and the housing injustice. He had a critique about that. He had even a critique about white supremacy and how it looks via imperialism and foreign policy. So he had a critique about white supremacy, but he also had a critique about our behavior, and he always called and summoned Black people to do better, that we should be more moral people, more upright people, and clean ourselves up, that we can do something for ourselves, because we can't expect other people to respect us unless we respect ourselves. And part of the issue that I see today with the Black Lives Matter movement and some of these other things that are going on is nothing but there's a critique of mass incarceration. There's a critique of police brutality. There's a critique that white folks who control corporations to give Black folks more jobs, right? But there's not a critique on, or as much fervor or emphasis about why our communities are breaking apart, why our families are breaking apart. Why is it that white men make up 30% of the population and Black men make up 6% of the population, yet in the United States of America, there's about 1,000 more Black men killed a year than white men in America, but white men make up 5 times more than Black men. Like the amount of violence that we do on each other as Black people, right?
Right.
So and what are the underlying reasons for that? So that's part of the discourse that we don't hear from much of the Black leadership or the so-called woke leadership. And I think that we need to go back and review history about what did our people get right that we used to do that we've abandoned due to the influence of so-called liberals that have influenced us with their immorality.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. So Malcolm famously said this in October 1963 at the famous Message to the Grassroots speech at King Solomon Church here in Detroit on 14th Street. And as people are accustomed to, they cherry pick which part of Malcolm they like. And the aspect of Malcolm that deals with white supremacy, calling the white man the devil, and condemning global oppression is well received. But the aspect of Malcolm's message that deals with self-study, self-critique, discipline, morality, sobriety, controlling your sexual desires. This is the part of Malcolm that people don't want to embrace because
Hello, brother, you still there?
it requires
You're breaking up for a second, brother. Can you hear me? Excuse excuse us in the audience. The brother's connection's a little bad right now. We're trying to get him. Brother Shakir, can you hear me? Yeah, so yeah, brother Shakir is having some connection problems again. Please pardon us for that. Hopefully, um, he can chime back in when his connection gets better. Um, and he was referencing when I referenced that he clarified it that famous saying of all of our studies, history is best qualified to reward our research. That was said in 1963 at King Solomon Baptist Church, and that church today is pastored by our brother, the Reverend Charles Williams II, who's also the head of the National Action Network here in Detroit, and fills in for Reverend Al Sharpton quite a bit, and has been a leader in addressing a lot of the issues of police misconduct and police brutality here in the state of Michigan, including we walk side by side in terms of when the FBI murdered an African American Muslim religious leader here back in October of 2009, Imam Luqman Abdullah, who was a friend and a fundraiser for former SNCC leader H. Rap Brown, who later changed his name to Imam Jamil El-Amin. And may Almighty God help H. Rap Brown, Imam Jamil El-Amin, from his unjust incarceration. So as we wait for Brother Shakir to come back on, he was making a very good and salient point about how many people in the Black community, and I would even go further and say Muslims who aren't Black, like to treat Malcolm X like a buffet. And what I mean by like a buffet is that when you have a buffet, you have an assortment or an array of different sorts of items to eat, and then you only eat the portions of food that you like on the buffet, and then you skip over the other dishes. So many people treat Malcolm like a buffet. So they his speaking
That's right.
truth about white supremacy and the police brutality. They like that part of Malcolm. They like those potatoes,
right.
and then they like a little bit of the green beans if he's talking about global white supremacy and imperialism and Vietnam and things like that. They take that part. But when Malcolm talks about sexual morality, then they don't. They skip over that. They skip over that macaroni and cheese, right? Or if it's talking about um, you know, take care of your women, take care of your women folk, and be a responsible man, be a responsible husband. Then maybe that part gets uh, glossed over, or do something for yourself and stop begging others to do for you what you should be doing for yourself. And then those are the parts of Malcolm that a lot of us like to to gloss over. So I was just, Brother
Yes.
Shakir, I see you're back. I just was trying to fill in the gaps of some of the things that you were saying as you dropped off.
Yeah, I just wanted to add too. Remember, Malcolm tried to uh, warn and identify African Americans about the criminal matrix of the United States. So Malcolm said he sells you whiskey and then he locks you up when he catches you drunk. He sells you a deck of cards and he locks you up when he catches you gambling. He sells you dope and then locks you up when he catches you using the dope. After he makes you these things, he talks about you. And so African Americans have fallen into the trap. We buy his dope, we drink his alcohol, we participate in their foolishness, and then we cry racism when we get put in his criminal justice system. When the joke is on us for participating in this technology to begin with.
That's right. That's right. And besides that part about the technology that we've fallen into, I think that sometimes when we talk about white supremacy, which really whites aren't supreme, it's really a false ideology that has real social consequences, but it's a false ideology of white supremacy.
Yes.
I think that sometimes we even give we give so much weight to the white man that in a sense it disempowers us. That sometimes we overly blame white folks for everything based upon our condition, that it kind of hampers us for doing what we should be doing for ourselves, right? So prime example, right? And I want to break this myth up right here because it's a big myth, especially here in Detroit, that we have in the Black community. We have everybody else that runs the stores except for us, right? We got Koreans that own the hair supply and the wig shops. We got the Vietnamese that do the nails. We have the Chaldeans that own the small grocery stores and the party stores and some of like the Sprint, Metro PCS. We got the Arabs that run the gas stations. So everybody else is making money in the Black community, right? But like one of the myths is that, well, we can't have none of these businesses, because when these Arabs come in to America, that the government doesn't make them pay taxes for 7 years. So first of all, that's a myth. That's not true. You think that the people in their right mind think that the white man who bombed these people's countries, who bombed Vietnam, who killed hundreds of thousands, who killed 3 million people in Vietnam, somehow loves Vietnamese, that he's going to give Vietnamese 7 years tax break. He bombs Iraq into smithereens and kills 1 million Iraqis, and then he's going to let Iraqis come over here and give him a 7-year tax break. Like that's a ridiculous that's a ridiculous statement, right? But we use these types of excuses with that help and disempower us when people come over here who can't even speak English or barely can speak English, can't read.
That's right.
And but they end up working in their family home, 3-bedroom home, maybe 12, 15 people working a little business. The next, they do that in 3 years, 5 years later, they got their own business and they keep on flipping it and flipping it and flipping it. And I know you and I have talked about, what do you really think's at the root of this? Because it's not, this is not a political issue right here. It's not about the government or even banks favoring a Vietnamese or an Arab over a black person, or it's not as if the white politicians just love them a Korean more than they love black people, a white politician. What do you think is at the real roots of this, brother? Because we have to be candid and get to the root. We just can't be
Sure.
emotional. If we're gonna get some
Yeah.
solutions to remedy our situation.
Yeah. The real root is black internalized depression. The real root of this is black Americans don't like black Americans. The root of this is that black Americans, and I'm not saying all in the same way that we never say that all white people are racist, but we know that racism is a dominant theme in white America. Black self-hatred and black internalized depression are dominant themes in black America. And so this is at the root of our inability to come together and do anything, is that quite frankly we don't like each other. And so Jewish Americans who came to this country, they knew that they could not get loans from white banks, and so they had to create uh, internal credit systems amongst themselves. The same was the case with Chinese Americans who came to the West Coast in the late 19th century and early 20th century, many of whom suffered violent repressive measures against them, such as extrajudicial police killings, lynchings, and things of that nature. They knew that they could not go to the broader white society to fund their businesses and their institutions.
Yeah, you were breaking up a little bit,
So they
beloved.
had to.
Go ahead, brother. Yeah, so we seem to have uh, a connection problem again, and what brother Shakir was articulating, we do know that there are uh, situations in which there are um, people that come and who are immigrants and give certain favors, pay off certain politicians and get certain political favors. Um, but there's a psychological reason why those people can come over here and do that and do it in our community, and we don't have it in our own community to this extent. And we used to have some of these things until the uh, the devil came and systematically tried to undo our community. So we had Black Wall Street in Tulsa, right? We know what they did. They burned it down. We had Rosewood, Florida. We had the Black Bottom in Detroit, where they ran the highway through that. They did the same thing in Nashville and many other cities, that they intentionally tried to disrupt the economic center of Black folks. But white folks also did this with other people. They did this with Chinese people. They did this with Japanese people, right? Um, but there's something about the psyche, and there's certain things that have been done amongst Black people for ourselves, that healthy nationalism or that healthy stick-to-itiveness that other groups have, we've seemed to have been separated from that or have lost that to a big degree. So part of the way, and Brother Shakir comes back on, I want to ask him about this. Part of the way of help we get to remedy these self-inflicted wounds that we have, that we can better help our communities, because we need to have stronger families to make stronger communities. We need to have a level of an economic base, right? But none of this can be done if we don't like each other, right? If we don't have a strong love for ourselves, that stick-to-itiveness, that we have a natural, healthy sense of doing for self instead of asking others to do for us what we should do for ourselves. And as Dr. King mentioned about this in the latter part of his life, that this is a check that the government can't sign in cash for us, right? We're the only ones who can write this check and cash this check for ourselves. We can't, other people can't do it for us, right? So this is an issue that we have to talk about when we're talking about remedying some of these self-inflicted wounds. But here comes Brother Shakir that's come back. Yeah, I lost you, beloved brother. Go ahead and finish the point that you were making.
Yeah, so I was saying that the root of our inability to come together is rooted in our deep internalized oppression. The irony that Black Wall Street and all of these other Black enclaves were established because we did exactly that. The difference being, however, is that we had no other choice. And when integration came, many of our institutions we abandoned. So that, for example, in Detroit in the 1950s, Detroit had 9 Black hospitals. It had the Gotham Hotel. It had a whole host of other institutions. And in many instances, we know that Black enclaves were across America were either destroyed because of white violence or urban renewal and eminent domain. However, what they did demonstrate was the ability of our people to come together through their resources and develop institutions. But again, the caveat, they had no choice. The problem, I think, with us, as you indicated, brother, this is not a political issue. This is an issue of our own psyche, of our own deep-seated level of devaluation of ourselves and our own ability to come together and develop as other ethnic groups have done. And ethnic groups who come from some of the poorest places in the world and come from conditions that we can never imagine. Yet they come to our communities and they thrive. And they thrive because our people support them.
You know, speaking of that, I know you've traveled quite a bit. What I remember, something that really struck me as very, it was eye-opening, and that was the first time I went to Mali. And unfortunately, right now, Mali has had a coup d'état there, though it's been a bloodless coup d'état, but they had a coup d'état, and the president was just removed from power there. But the time when I was first in Mali about 12 years ago, and I've always heard this link about poverty and crime, about poverty is the number one reason for crime. And I used to hold more to this philosophy, and it changed when I went to Mali. At that time, Mali was the 4th poorest country on earth per capita. And the average income for a Malian at that time was 275 American dollars. And Brother Shakir, I was in the capital of Bamako, and I met with the mayor. And I think the year before I was there, Detroit had about 500 murders.
Right.
And at the time, Bamako was over double Detroit's population. It was about 2.2 million. And I think at that time we still had a million people. I think Detroit's like around 750,000 people now, but we had about a million people then. And I asked the mayor of Bamako, how many murders did you have last year in your city? And he's like, murders. So I was like, yeah, murders. Yeah, like when someone kills someone and it's not self-defense. And he said 4. And in Bamako, people have guns, just like people have guns here. And people have knives, like people have knives there. And someone who used to live in the old Brewsters, well, the old Brewsters would be like a penthouse suite in comparison to how most people live in downtown Bamako, right?
That's
Yet they only had 4 murders that year, whereas we had almost 500. And I came to the conclusion that number one, those people had a cohesive way of life that had certain morality and certain public mores of what's good and what's bad. And then the second thing is they still had this concept of extended family that led to a type of healthy tribal pride. So um, Sister Fanta is not going to go out and get pregnant out of wedlock. Why? Because that's going to bring shame to her whole clan, right?
That's right.
Brother Mamadou, he's not going to go out and knock up 3 or 4 different women and not take care of them, because that's going to look bad on the entire tribe, right? So it's like that type of communal morality and public mores that's been decimated in our community, and we used to have it.
That's right.
And it's almost completely gone in Black America now, right? So what do you think it is? What do you think it is that we can, what steps can we take to help remedy this? Because we know back in our parents' and grandparents' generation, actually, I looked this stat up before I let you answer. I looked this stat up earlier, and at the start of World War II, around that time, 1 out of 10, it was about 1 out of 10 Black children in America were born out of wedlock. Now, in Black America, in 2019, 7 out of 10 Black children are born out of wedlock. In Detroit, 8 out of 10 children are born out of wedlock.
Right.
And we were poorer back then.
That's right.
So what do you think we can do to turn the tide on this, and some remedies? Because we've talked about a lot of problems, but I wanted to talk about some solutions, especially as it relates to your research of your new book that you're writing.
Yeah, we have to develop again, redevelop and reestablish our own value system that's separate from the dominant culture. This has largely been one of the main downfalls of the African American community, is that we embrace the value system of the broader society, either through their movies, through their literature, through their ideas, and so forth. And as you pointed out, decades ago, our people were poorer. We were closer to slavery. We didn't have Black mayors. We didn't have Black congresspersons. We didn't have a Black person in the White House. We didn't have Black police chiefs. Yet we had more morality, more self-control. We didn't drop out of school the way we do now. We didn't curse out teachers and throw chairs through the window. Didn't do the things that we do now. So we have to redevelop a value system that speaks to our particular ethos as a people. We once upon a time had our own value system. We had aspects of of Protestant ethos from the Bible. But in many instances, we had our own value systems that we inherited. Some of it, believe it or not, survived even during slavery. That many people probably would find that hard to believe. Uh, but some of the mores and value systems that we have, some of it is traced to a period that precedes slavery, and so we need to reclaim a value system that's totally separate from the value system that our people have inherited from this country and by extension from Western Europe. This is key. A value system, a system of morals, a system of values, a system of integrity. Because again, what our people don't understand is that when our people act the way they do, all this does is reinforce the notion that racist white people had of us originally, and that we are uncivilized savages and beasts. And so when we act like this, all we do is reinforce that belief. So we have to have a value system. We have to have morality, ethics, integrity, and essentially we have to recreate a rules of engagement with each other in our community. And when people work jobs, when people go to Chrysler, they admit when people accept a job with Ford and Chrysler and General Motors, they accept to follow the value system of Chrysler. You're gonna follow the morals and the value system of General Motors, or else you're not gonna have a job. So it's not like people don't know how to submit and follow orders and follow values and cultural perspectives in other people's institutions. We do it all the time. It's just that we haven't established it amongst ourselves, and that's why our communities are the way that they are.
Yeah, you know, my grandfather, he's 95 years old, and he grew up as a sharecropper right outside Orangeburg, South Carolina. And we were talking a couple of years ago about a few things, and he said something. I think I came back and told you about that, brother. What he said is that back in the old days, when he grew up, and when the Klan was in full effect, and when basically he was a legalized slave and came from South Carolina up to Virginia, is one thing he said. He said that we didn't have money like the white man. We didn't have cars like the white man. We couldn't go to the white man's schools. He said, but one thing we could say, and we used to say, he said that we said that we were more moral than the white man.
That's right.
But then what he said took me back, and he said, I'm not so sure that we can say that anymore. And that really threw me back when he said that, just to be real. And part of this issue that you're talking about is really, and I want to hear some more steps, and we could talk about more, because I know your book is going to touch on this, and we don't want to give away all the spoilers. I want to have you back, but how is it that on the one hand we speak out against the real injustices that have been done to us by this society and the false system of white supremacy, but at the same time focus our attention, maybe it's even more of our attention, on how we can readjust our thinking so that we're not operating by the dominant culture's immorality. That when the white society catches a cold, we catch pneumonia.
That's right.
You know,
That's right. Yeah. Well, again, you and I, for example, we have our values. We have a certain value system, and that value system is predicated upon our beliefs. People will call this religion, which I think oftentimes the word religion is a very simplistic, very myopic, and very reductive term. I would prefer to say belief and value system because that's essentially what it is. Uh, the culture of General Motors, people don't call it a religion, but it's a belief system. If you come to General Motors, this is how you have to act, this is how you have to behave, this is how you must conform if you're going to exist in this atmosphere. Now, people don't call it a religion, it's a belief system. So, similarly, people have to have a belief system that they subscribe to, that this becomes what motivates them. And this belief system is anchored in something that doesn't have any connection with the dominant system. It doesn't blow with the wind. It doesn't change at the whim of other people's opinions and desires, but it remains constant, and its root and its foundation is in something that's of a much higher value and a much higher principle than the opinions and whims of other people. And so uh, this is what motivate this. This is People have to be anchored to a belief system. People have to be anchored to principles and values. And so this also begs the other question, like, who are we? People say, well, I'm a black man. Okay, well, taking away your skin complexion, what does that mean? Who are we? And I ask that question because you know of people based on their value system. People are known by their cultural, ethical, and moral expressions. This is how you know a people. And so this is who we have to ask ourselves, like, well, who am I? Well, I'm a black man and I'm a black woman. Okay, well, define what that means. What does that mean? You mean you're a black man with no beliefs, no morals? You have no value system? You have no ethics? You don't have any bylaws that you live according to? I mean, what is this? What does that mean?
well, if we go by what the dominant culture tries to feed us, then we're in bad shape because the dominant culture that lifts up certain media portrayals and lifts up and endorse who we should be supporting politically, that is all designed to disempower us. And I think one of the challenges, as far as us calling us organizing, Brother Shakir, and calling our people to a code, if we want to use that term,
Right.
a moral and ethical code, is how can we get this message out and disseminate it? Because right now, if we look at what's hot in Black America, and I just use three examples, and I'll start off bigger and come to something that's lesser, and especially for our younger people, because really the change that's going to come for the society is it to turn the tide has to come from the younger people, right?
Right.
Um, so uh, we have, like, back in our day, Tupac and Biggie, who were rappers who both got murdered within about a year themselves. That was abnormal. That wasn't the norm. Now, a rapper gets killed almost every 2 or 3 weeks.
Right.
A different rapper. The number one song on the Billboard chart is by, right now, is a song that dropped about a week ago from an Afro Latina and an African American woman, Cardi B and Megan Thee Stallion, a song talking about an acronym WAP, and I'm not going to say what that means.
Sure.
That's the number one song that our people are rocking right now.
Right.
Um, and then the Democratic Party just last night or the night before, when they kicked off their thing, they threw on stage as an entertainment a black gay dude wearing some sort of like costume that looked like half a suit and half a dress,
Yeah.
and that's what they're celebrating about what black masculinity should look like.
Yeah.
So that's what our people are being bombarded with. We're being bombarded with complete tomfoolery and stuff that's not going to do anything to empower us, but further take us down to the gutter. So the
Yeah.
challenge is, how can we get out this information to affect cultural change amongst our people, given what we're up against right now?
We have to use uh the means that are available, social media, and we have to couch this morality and ethics in cultural terms, and we have to let people know that uh, these images and these values that they are subscribing to are not theirs. They were given to them by someone else, and they need to understand that historically our people we had our own value system, and so we can use history, and we can use the example of other ethnic groups, that the moral fiber and the cohesiveness that binds them is what they decide amongst themselves, and they don't allow strangers and foreign elements to import disgusting, filthy, toxic values and images to them. And so using the media, uh, we can use the media that's available. It would also help to have personalities who subscribe to this, who are famous, to begin to promote this and get this out, and to remind people that, I mean, well, before I say that, here's the other thing. Uh, and this gives an indication of how low and how little people think of the African American community. That the way to get us to vote for someone or to ignite our attention is always through some entertainment, right? Don't use objective analysis or real concrete facts. Just bring an entertainer on, and that will get our attention and get us behind a candidate. And so this is an indication of how little people think of us, that we can always be captivated, with some entertainment, some demonstrations of entertainment, and in this instance, something filthy and disgusting like that. But yeah, I think we need to use the means that are available to us, and people have to be courageous enough to step out front and make the arguments. That's the bottom line, because this is not a popular discourse. This discourse about morality and accountability and self-respect and decency. This is not a popular discourse now. At least it's not popular, in these mainstream mediums of entertainment and communication. So,
Well, I mean, not only is it not popular, I mean, Marvel now is making like a new comic book with like gay superheroes. I mean,
Right.
Disney. I mean, you can't even let
Yeah.
your kids. You can't even let your
Right.
kids watch the Disney Channel or little kid movies or read comic books because they're trying to infiltrate and change our children's values to the point. And if
That's
you
right.
notice too, that when they want to push up this figure, it always has to be someone black because they try to
Absolutely.
use black okay, the first football player that comes out that is kicking it that way, that's a black
Right.
dude, and then
Right.
the first one that comes to this, and then this is a black woman, and you see
That's right.
even so this is all by design, and this is why we are really in a struggle, in a cultural struggle
That's right.
against a satanic beast,
That's right.
and,
Again,
and so we're
that's
involved
right.
in spiritual warfare.
That's right. This is spiritual warfare. Here we are, and here people are saying that Black Lives Matter, and they are endorsing a concept, homosexuality, that emanates from Western Europe. How in the hell can Black Lives Matter when if two men get married, they cannot produce a child? So if someone's father married a man, they would not exist. If someone's woman had married another woman, they would not exist. So how can Black Lives Matter with an imported doctrine of homosexuality that emanates from Western Europe and a value system of secularism and immorality that emanates from Western Europe? So we're going to use concepts and belief systems that come from Western Europe and use those to fight against white supremacy. This is absurd and insane.
Yeah, it's definitely absurd, especially the whole notion about this secular movement or this neo-Marxism, and you know, and I've said this many times, black people can't get liberated from black people cannot find liberation through European secular thought, nor by white foundation money or white corporate money.
That's right.
Right? Like if we're expecting people outside of us to fund us for our own liberation, that's one of the biggest. We've been completely bamboozled,
That's
right?
right.
So there's so much education that needs to be done. I really need to have you come back on, and probably bring you back on closer to when your book comes out. But give us a little taste test. Let's wet our beak a little bit about your book that you're wrapping up right now.
Yeah, essentially, what I'm discussing, what I'm writing about, is the way in which the historical system of white supremacy and the stratified structure of American society historically, how it psychologically affected Black Americans to the point where it made us become our own worst enemy. And I alluded to this before, that external oppression has produced internalized oppression. And there have been many studies done on people who have been exposed to varying levels of trauma and external oppression, and being powerless to revisit this on their oppressor, they essentially revisit it on themselves because they now psychologically and subconsciously believe that they're not valuable. And in the African American community, this often starts out at a very young age. So, all across America, in lunchrooms, on playgrounds, in locker rooms, at birthday parties, in homerooms, etc., we learned the art and the skill to humiliate other Black people. We learn how to talk about each other's clothes. We learn how to talk about each other's hair, each other's skin complexion. Your mama is ugly. Y'all family still on welfare. Nigga, you don't know how to pull any women. You ain't got no game, and all of this garbage. And it carries over into adulthood. So we are people who have mastered the ability on how to humiliate people who look like us. When you talk about the way that black men have learned to refer to black women and vice versa, and how we refer to black women as female dogs, as the B word and the H word. But Jewish women, Italian women are never the B word or the H word. So the only women in the world who are the B word or the H word are always women who look like us, but they never look like anybody else. And so the root of this deep-seated self-hatred and internalized depression, and how it even caused us to betray and assassinate our own leaders. So that all of the leaders historically that we claim we love, excuse me, and this goes all the way back to the slave revolts of Gabriel Prosser, Nat Turner, it's Harriet Tubman, it's Ida B. Wells, it's Marcus Garvey, it's Malcolm X, it's Emmett Till, it's Fred Hampton, it's James Chaney, it's Medgar Evers, it's Dr. Martin Luther King. Every individual that I named was in some way, shape, or form betrayed by Black folks.
Yeah.
And so this is essentially what I'm trying to get at, is this psyche that makes us so brutal and vicious and apathetic against ourselves, but we never act this way against anyone else except people who look like us.
That's right. That's right. And I'm of the actual opinion, Brother Shakir, that we should be spending very little time trying to convince other people to respect us and love us, and spend more time working on doing for self and working for us to love self so we can do something for ourselves. I'm not overly inclined to try to get other people to try to love and respect us.
That's
I'm
right.
not overly inclined towards that. And I think that we've been given up, and we've already been given a blueprint.
That's right.
Malcolm left us a blueprint. He left us a blueprint of how to resist the devil, and at the same time, how to do something for ourselves and love ourselves and others before Malcolm. I don't want to take away.
Right.
You mentioned the Honorable Marcus Garvey, Noble Drew Ali. I mean, there were other people that came about and talked about us doing something for ourselves and spending more time on doing something and trying to love ourselves instead of begging somebody to like us and do
Yeah,
something
this is
for
part of
us.
yeah, and this is part of our psychology, is that 2020 we're still begging someone to validate us and love us. This is indicative of our deep-seated mental illness. Is that in this day and time, we still are waiting for someone else to love us, to validate us, to say that we're beautiful. In this day and time, we're still waiting for people who, for over 400 years, have never given us justice to give us justice. And again, this is indicative of our insanity and mental illness, is that we're still waiting for validation from everyone else, but we refuse to validate ourselves. This is indicative of our mental illness and our insanity.
Wow. And you said the word insanity. You just made me think about what I believe it was Albert Einstein that mentioned that about one of the definitions. No, I think it was Sigmund Freud, that he said that one of the definitions of insanity is to keep doing the same thing over and over, expecting different results.
That's right. So here we are in 1963 at the March on Washington. The message was jobs and justice. At the 20th anniversary of the March on Washington in 1983, the message was jobs and justice. The 40th anniversary of the March on Washington, again, it was about more jobs and justice. So we're still talking about jobs and justice. And again, other people are coming to our community and making billions off of us, and we're still going to people, begging them for acceptance, begging them for justice, waiting for them to treat us justly, waiting for them to tell us that we're beautiful. And in that same period of time, have done absolutely nothing among ourselves to better our own condition with our own abilities and our own resources. So again, this is reflective of our mental illness and our insanity.
Well, thank you, Brother Shakir. We're going to do a follow up, God willing. Uh, we're going to do a follow up, God willing, when you get closer to having your book out. I think what I'm going to do too, and I have a contact to try to get him on. I think I'm going to try to get on, and we need to have maybe another discussion just on this issue of internalized oppression. And I'm going to reach out to Dr. Naeem Akbar, because that book that he wrote, Breaking the Chains of Psychological Slavery,
Yes.
that's that's current right now with Dr.
Absolutely.
Naeem Akbar wrote about. So I think I'm going to reach out to Dr. Naeem Akbar and see if we can have maybe a joint show to talk about that, because I think that's the order of the day. But you know, I think all our people really need is just a group of us to go out and just show our people some love and love our people hard, like how Malcolm did and how a
Yeah.
lot of the brothers did back then, the sisters. And a lot of our people just haven't been shown love and shown
Right.
love from someone that looks like them. I think love is one of the biggest cures to help us in our with our condition.
Absolutely. I agree. You think about, I remember as a little boy, this, what you're talking about, the way in which we related to each other as brothers and sisters. And I saw a revival of this in the late 80s when I was a student at Howard University, with the type of music that was coming out at that time. And you think about how, you had all of these hip hop artists, primarily from New York, uh, Public Enemy, uh, Boogie Down Productions. I mean, a whole host of people who had African Americans reading books, who had African Americans changing their diet, changing their dress, changing
X
their language,
Clan, X
changing the
Clan,
way in which. Yes, that's right. X Clan and leaders of the new school, poor righteous teachers. I
Queen
mean, you had a
Latifah.
whole genre of music. Queen Latifah. You had a whole genre of music that changed the way people, Jungle Brothers, that the way in which we related to each other.
Poor
But
righteous
right
teachers.
after that, poor righteous teachers. But right after that, you have this wave, primarily coming from the West Coast, where we go from calling our women sisters and hey brother, and we're reading books. Now we wanna ride down the street sipping on gin and juice. So we go from knowledge, civilization, culture, and building to garbage and nonsense and foolishness, in a matter of a few years. This is how quickly it was co-opted. So we go from sisters back then wearing head wraps, dressing respectively, to Cardi B and all this other garbage and this foolishness. And so that's indicative of how we allowed something that we created to be co-opted by dominant culture, because the satanic individuals who run the music industry, they didn't want Negroes reading books and changing the diet and no longer eating pork and drinking beer and smoking weed, and instead eating fruit, exercising, and and fasting. That's not what we want. And unfortunately, that's what happened.
Yeah, well, I think part of it too, and we had some of that stuff back in the day too, but we had a mix, right? So for instance, we we had we had Two Live Crew, but we had BDP, right? And we had Ice T, but then we also had Big Daddy Kane, right? So we kind of like had a mix, and as you
Right,
mentioned, a lot of the industry, they kind of lifted up certain uh, frames and certain sort of um, groups and began to mass promote them. And there wasn't that balance of, you had the street stuff. But I mean, but even some of the conscious rappers were still considered to be respectable on the street back then, right? So that's
right.
probably for another discussion. Dr. Ware has been having a lot of good conversations about hip hop and a lot of this recently. He actually had BG Knockout on his show yesterday.
Right.
Yeah, but so today, a lot of the culture has gotten out of balance, and that's a big part of the problem. But anyway, good brother. Any last thoughts before we close it out?
Yeah, last thought is that our biggest priority right now needs to be ourselves. That is not to say that our people should take their foot off the um, gas pedal toward agitating for justice with external forces. But we need to turn our attention to our internal enemy amongst ourselves. And because this is more insidious, it's more hidden, it's more insidious, and it's more dangerous and more destructive. And while we have spent so much time dealing with, uh, uh, and talking about police reform and systemic racism, we have not talked enough about our own deep-seated demons and our own deep-seated issues that only we can correct. These are issues that only we can address. It's not saying that other people don't have a role to play, but only we can correct them, because we have agency, we do have free will, we do have responsibility, and uh, we may not be able to change everything about white supremacy, but we can change the way in which we react to it. And so, in my opinion, we need to turn our focus toward our own internal issues, because as other ethnic groups demonstrated, especially the Jews, your real power comes from within your own, and it emanates from without. It doesn't emanate from somewhere else, it comes from within. And this is why they and other groups are so powerful, because, again, their power comes from within. It comes from their own belief in themselves and their own willingness and determination to rely on themselves and make the welfare of their people and their institutions the utmost priority. And our ethnic group, our people, needs to do the same.
Okay, thank you, good brother. And with that, we are going to conclude this episode of Resurrection, Social and Spiritual Renewal. And thank you all for listening. And for those of you who are watching this live now, please share the Facebook link and the YouTube, and like the YouTube link after this finishes processing. And we will catch you next time. Peace be upon you. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam. Thank you so much, brother.